Let's start with a question. Who knows about Dashlane? Raise your hand. Not that many people. Obviously, by the end of this talk, you will want to try Dashlane. But let's start by talking about digital identity, because this is the topic of the talk. A while back, I had a friend who was shopping at the Galeries Lafayette, and at some point, she realized that she couldn't find her bag anymore. She thought she had forgotten it in one of the corner shops. She went through the whole store, could not find it, and at the end, she had to realize that it had probably been stolen. So she was pretty upset, as you can imagine. She went to the police to declare the theft, went home, and a few hours later, she got a call from the Galeries Lafayette saying that they had found the bag dumped in a corner and that she could come the next day between 10 and 12 to get it from the lost and found. She was obviously very relieved. And the next day, when she arrived at the Galeries, actually the agent in the lost and found was very surprised. The bag was not there, and they had never called her. What had actually happened is that in the meantime, someone had broken into her house and emptied it totally. Now, let me tell you another story. This is the story of the Dropbox breach. In 2016, Dropbox announced that it had been breached in 2012. 68 million accounts had been stolen and leaked on the internet. And what's interesting is that the investigation showed that the reason of the breach was an employee of Dropbox who had reused the same password between home and work, and that password had been leaked in the previous breach. So a small incident had created even bigger nightmare. And those two stories from the physical and digital world show you the parallel of you'd better be safe rather than being sorry afterwards. And essentially, if you look at what happened in the past 18 months, Cambridge Analytica, GDPR, the Facebook fine, Marriott being breached, all those occurrences of how essentially digital identity is totally broken today on the internet. We have billions of users, millions of businesses. They all rely on the internet to access digital service providers, to transact with them. And the problem is that by doing so, each time you create a little piece of your digital identity all over the places. You copy your identity card, you copy your credit card, you have your social security number. They're all spread around, and it's as if your digital identity was all over the place in the cloud. It's really, you don't have a footprint, you have crumbles and crumbles scatters all over the place. And the main problem is that it's obviously it's bad for the users. Each time you need to log in, each time you need to check out, each time you need to register, you have that friction, constant friction of, okay, do I remember my password? Oh, I need to put that field, and so on. You have no idea what data is being captured. On top of willingly providing data to register for a website, remember that the service providers will also get things like your geographical location, your device type, your browsing history, and many more. They get a lot of details from you without you knowing. And obviously, most of those companies use that data for monetization, either for advertisement or for profiling. And at the end of the day, it's uncontrollable. You have no clue where your data is. It's hundreds of copies of identity data all over the places. But when you think about it, it's also bad for the service providers themselves. You have the issue of the sign-up funnel. Some of you are maybe into a digital company. Of course, it's a business issue if you have a friction in the business funnel, if you have a checkout flow that's not smooth and easy to use. The liability and the risk that is coming from regulation is more and more. Think about GDPR. Most of you have probably been, in a way or another, involved into a GDPR project. Lucky you. But that's a real risk, and you have a CCPA in California that's happening, and that's going to be a widespread issue for all companies. And at the end of the day, it's a question of people just not trusting companies anymore. They are worried that those internet service providers, they do whatever they want with the data. And unfortunately, the problem is not getting better. It's, I would argue, even getting worse and worse. We use more and more devices today. The average is 3 and more devices. We create more and more digital accounts every year and every year. And if you look at the news, well, you get massive breaches all the time. Those are just a few examples of the big ones, 1.5 billion accounts being leaked by Yahoo. If you were in a Marriott hotel one day or another, you can be sure that your passport, your email address, your credit card number is over there, that's for sure. So it's, we have a real issue here. It's basically digital identity is plain wrong. And you could argue, well, what do we do about it? In practice, when you look at what users, what everybody does in that room, we do very little. There are only 12% of us that actually use some kind of password manager or an equivalent tool. 86%, well, you cannot see the colors, whatever. 86% of us just memorize it in the heads, which means that you reuse the same password everywhere and you get the risk associated to it. 49% write them down on a piece of paper, which you could argue is not so bad, but not so cool either. Well, essentially, we have given up. There's no real solution today, so we think, okay, well, there's a risk and a burden, and we live with it, we accept fate. And why is digital identity so broken? That's an interesting question, because you could think, okay, we have big tech, we could solve it easily, we just code it, and so on. But if you go back to the origin of the internet, at the core of the foundation, there are two populations. There's the army, they built ARPANET, and there are the academics, the CERN, and so on. And those two populations, they had in mind that this was a trusted network. They were between themselves, and everybody was nice and happy. So in the technical building blocks, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, there was no notion of identity, no notion of authentication. And unfortunately, things have not evolved in the right way. The web technology, from the plain old HTML that was mostly about display, up to the more advanced capability you can have today on a web app about interacting with the device, there's no identity anywhere. You can look at that little diagram here. Nothing about digital identity components. So what can you expect? Huh? And the problem is that also, well, the internet boomed. From the early days to today, the estimates are that there will be about 50 billion connected devices in 2020. And all of them, one way or another, whether they are IoT, a laptop, a phone, and so on, they will have to handle some form of identity or authentication. So it's not an easy problem to solve. Huh? The first main issue is that it needs to be a universal solution. It needs to work everywhere. It needs to be agnostic from any provider, work cross-platform. Think about your passport, your physical passport. With that passport, you can travel in any country in the world, and it works the same everywhere. Obviously, you need to have a visa or an ESTA or something of that sort, but essentially the passport is universal. There's nothing like it on the internet. The internet is totally fragmented. And the problem is that the big tech giants, that the Apple and Google of the world that build it, they can't really solve it from themselves. They are trying to find solutions that work in their own little walled garden, that work in their own little territory, but they don't really have an incentive to try and look at the broader picture and find a broader solution. And this is a diagram of the platform of interaction from our users. And as you can see, everybody uses a bit of everything. It's not like we are just using Apple devices or only Google and so on. We are transacting and going to the internet on all those different platforms. Another hope was that biometry would be a solution. Yeah, biometry is cool. You have your fingerprint, you have your face ID, you have all that cool technology. But one, biometric can be faked. You may have heard of some of the US institutions who have leaked biometric data, and now they have a big problem because they use it to get access to the buildings. Two, once it's compromised, what can you do? I mean, it's not like you're going to change your face or your fingerprints. There's no standard. It's device specific, and for whatever reason, the manufacturers have not come up with a standard or shared protocol to manage biometry. And at the end of the day, biometry is just a little part of the solution. It just covers the verification of your identity. It does not cover how you manage your broader identity, which is about your addresses, your social security number, your whole life. Another hope was that a solution like Facebook Connect, login with Google would be a solution. And truth is, it's a good convenience, it's better for convenience for the users. But it cannot really be a solution either. When you look at the recent breaches, one of the big breaches was about Facebook Connect. Because Facebook Connect was breached, 90 million accounts were impacted. And of course, if you use Facebook Connect or log in with Google, you are essentially putting all your eggs in the same basket, trusting that company to handle your own digital identity. And, well, that's maybe a convenience, but when you have 1.8 billion users being managed in a centralized way, it's just a massive target for any hacker. And it's just a question of time for it to be hacked and for the data to be leaked at some point. So that cannot be the final solution either. Myself, I have been leaked. I have had passwords go out there. I was in the Dropbox breach from 2012. I've been in the LinkedIn breach. But fortunately for me, a while back, I realized that I needed to do something about my credential hygiene. So I started using a password manager. And at the end of the day, this is how I ended up at Dashlane, but that's a different story. And the good thing is that with such a tool, I was able to generate unique passwords for all my accounts. So at the end of the day, of course, it's a nuisance for me if my password is leaked, but I just get to change that specific password and I'm fine. I still get email scams for people saying, oh, we know your old password, we're going to send us some bitcoins and so on, but I just ignore those emails because they're just obsolete passwords and they're now all unique. I have something like 1,000 passwords, they're all unique in Dashlane, and I only remember my master password, and this one I won't tell you. And I would like to think about tools like Product Manager a bit like the dentist. Of course, nobody likes to go to the dentist. Nobody really likes to brush their teeth every day. But at the end of the day, this is the best way to avoid cavities. So password managers are a bit like the dentist. They will give you the tools. They will show you how to use it. But it's for you to have the discipline of handling your credential hygiene and trying to get, not to get cavities or not to get breached. I like to use another metaphor, which is the car seat belt. Today, I guess nobody would think about not putting the seat belt in a car when you're driving on a highway. It's kind of the same thing on the internet. Why would we not put the equivalent of a seat belt when we navigate those digital highways? So we should use tools that allows us to be at least as safe as possible. It doesn't mean you won't get into a car accident or a car crash, but at least you'll probably be better off if you have the car seat belt than without it. So same thing, password managers are not perfect. Those tools that exist out there are not perfect, but it's better to use them than not doing anything. Better be safe than sorry, in a sense. There's a lot of skepticism. No, sorry, that's the next slide. At the end of the day, when you think about it, the problem is that breaches are a bit like climate change. I'm sorry for the parallel, it's a bit provocative, but it's just to show that behavioral change is hard. We hear all the time about the issues about breaches and data leaks and so on, and at the end of the day, we think that we're not concerned. We think it's someone else will be breached, I won't be breached, and then we don't change. It's a bit like climate change. Because we are not necessarily directly impacted, we don't really act on it. And today in the world, there are only 2% of electrical vehicles in the whole world, despite the fact that at least most of us, I hope, in that room are aware of the critical situation of climate change. And until someone next to you or yourself, you've been hacked and you have the nuisance of someone trying to use your credit card because it's been leaked and so on, you don't really realize that it's a real pain and that you should do something yourself. I was mentioning the skepticism about those tools. It's true that you could consider that, okay, but maybe tools like Dashlane is just another tool. It's a cloud-based solution, so it can be hacked itself. But here's a bit of the tech part of the talk. But actually what happened is that your user data is managed locally. It's on your device, and the goal of those tools is to make sure that you remain in control. So the data that you have will be encrypted locally on the device. It will use an encryption key, which is what we call the master password, and we will never get access to it. You remain in control of the data, and that's very important for the safety of the user, of course, but also for the safety of companies like Dashlane, because otherwise we are at risk of being leaked. So we do whatever we can to keep you in control with the ownership in your hands. We are independent of the big techs. We are independent of any ecosystem. We kind of think of ourselves as the Switzerland of digital identity. We don't want to be dependent on anybody. If you look at the future, there are kind of three main trends today in the market. The first one is, hopefully we start seeing the emergence of some standardized protocols. Both Apple and Google, they've started building their own proprietary solution, and they've been nice enough to start opening it up. And this is covering already part of the mobile world. The W3C, the body that is in charge of standards on the web, is promoting new standards around identity. One of them is called WebAuth. But still, we are a long, long way from having a universal solution here. Another trend is around what is called decentralized identity. There are concepts, you may have heard of self-sovereign identity, that's being promoted, for instance, by the Estonian government about offering everybody the ownership and the control of their own digital identity without the need of having an authority around you managing it. There are people, companies playing with blockchain, decentralized identity solutions, but today this is more prototyping and there's nothing really proven yet on that front. And the last one is some companies, essentially B2B enterprise SSO, which are marketing themselves as digital identity providers. But for me, there's more marketing today than reality, and it's still kind of a niche market. And none of those trends, for me, none of those solutions are really the real solution. They're not universal enough, and they're not going to the right direction. And I want to show you that quote from Ev Williams, the founder of Twitter and Medium. He says that convenience decides everything. And I would argue that no technical solution will repair the broken digital identity. We need a solution that is simple enough, easy to use, so that everybody can use it. I don't know what it is, but at least I know that the security and the tech are not enough strong triggers for people to change. So we need to find something that's so easy to use that my grandmother can use it. Otherwise, it won't be universal. So now what can you do yourself? Because you could argue, oh, but it's like climate change, maybe I cannot act locally. But I truly believe that each of us individually can do a little step, a baby step to help improve digital identity. And I will give you my example. Of course, I use Dashlane as password manager. That would be surprising otherwise. I've decided to use a safer browser like Brave, which is a variant on the Chromium browser, really focused on privacy. A while ago, I decided to delete my Facebook account. So do it if you have not done it yet. And I've even decided to migrate outside of Gmail, and now I'm using an independent email provider called Fastmail. It's a small Australian company. So I'm trying to detox myself from the big tech. And you can do the same. You can yourself take baby steps, and maybe not go as far as this, but start by using those tools. They exist today. They are a way for you to slowly regain ownership and control of your own digital identity. And if I want to take a bit of a provocative parallel, it's with the massive campaigns of vaccination, individual by individual, that mankind was able to get rid of some of the diseases like smallpox. So hopefully, if we all do a bit of something, we will improve the state of digital identity in the future. I will conclude by saying that you should start brushing your teeth and trying Dashlane. You have a promo code here if you want to give it a try, and feel free to get back to me and comment on it if you like the tool. Thank you very much.